Grab a cup of coffee and start your day with Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life. Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life features stories to inspire, motivate, and empower you. Live your best life now. Listen, learn, think, and decide. Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life. Visit cyacyl.com.
Welcome to Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life. I'm Joan Herman. Thanks for tuning in. In our crazy lives today, we have more ways to fulfill every desire than ever before. We have more possessions than we could ever want or need, and yet many people are unhappy. Today's guest, Sean Meshorer, author of the book, The Bliss Experiment, 28 Days to Personal Transformation, says that happiness is fleeting and not deeply transformative, while bliss is constant and is a spiritual state where happiness, profound meaning, and enduring truth converge. Bliss is a simple, accessible, and lasting solution to our personal suffering and to the external problems that ail us. Sean is here today to explain how bliss can benefit your life. According to Sean, bliss helps with stress, anxiety, and depression. It makes people more successful, better able to see and seize opportunities, and build or improve relationships. Sean is an author and speaker and was the CEO of a book publishing house and record label that specializes in personal development and Eastern religion books and recordings. Sean, welcome. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Joan.
Sean, what we're about to talk about today, I feel, is a very important topic. We spend way too much time cultivating and sometimes worshiping material things, and yet we're miserable. So this is a topic that I feel is very relevant in today's society. Before we get into that, I want to just define a couple of terms that we're going to talk about. To you, what is happiness? How do you define that term?
The best way to understand happiness and how it compares to bliss is that happiness is something that is externally based. And by that, I mean it could be, we might think that we're happy by having a large bank account or being famous or having power or being beautiful. But it could also mean higher order things like having warm, loving relationships or serving humanity. We can all think that these are things that contribute to our happiness. However, when you think about them, you realize that they all have one thing in common, which is that there is some external component to them. Obviously, money, material goods, or being famous requires other people to confer that fame status on us. But even a warm, loving relationship requires that other person with whom we're having the relationship. Or serving humanity means there are people out there that we are serving and interacting with. And so the commonality of all of the things that I call happiness are they all have that external aspect to them.
And bliss, how would you define that? What is the difference?
So bliss, then, is something that is entirely internal. We could be imprisoned in a jail cell in Thailand, and we could have no money, no contact with humanity, no ability to achieve our dreams, to serve other people, to do a productive job in society, nothing, and no one could know we were there. And even though we were locked in that jail cell, we could still be perfectly blissful, which is to say that we could go inside ourselves and tap into a deep feeling of inner peace and contentment and unconditional love and compassion and deep, abiding joy.
And Sean, by your definition, is bliss the same as joy? Because I want to make it clear for our listeners what exactly we're talking about today.
Joy is a component of bliss. You could say that bliss is a really elevated state of consciousness. And in that elevation of consciousness, we simultaneously feel incredible joy and upliftment, but it's a very calm and peaceful feeling, and it's a feeling of love. So it's where all of those higher qualities merge together in one elevated place of consciousness.
All right, Sean, so let's back up a little bit. What happened to you in your life that put you on this journey?
Well, I was always someone who was trying to figure out the meaning of life, like even as an eighth grader. And for a long time, that was a benign journey that I was on. I got to Stanford University when I was 18, and to me the only thing to do was to become a philosophy or religious studies major, because those were the things that were directly trying to figure out what's the meaning of life or what constituted a good life. The problem that I encountered at Stanford is that I started studying all this existentialist philosophy, this really dark stuff, depressing, there was no meaning to life, and that real men could just face the fact that life was inherently meaningless and dreary. And what I discovered is that my philosophy professors, a lot of them were very, very unhappy people. A lot of them were alcoholics or borderline alcoholics. And we would actually drink together with my professors, and I started drinking more and more. I started doing more and more drugs. I started feeling more and more unhappy. And then that culminated one night. I had an accidental drug overdose at a Stanford party, and I was rushed to the Stanford hospital emergency room where I almost died. And it wasn't just that my body was dying that night in the ER. What was also happening was my mind just broke. It was like a dam in my mind broke. And all of this overwhelming fear and anxiety and depression just came bubbling up, and I couldn't control it. I had no ability to, tamp it back down. And coming out, I was discharged from the hospital the next day because my body was stabilized, but my mind was not stabilized. And I fell into a really deep clinical depression, and I started having major panic attacks, constant anxiety, drug flashbacks. And then 2 months after that, my father was diagnosed with terminal cancer, and he died within 6 months, and I sat there with him and watched him die, and he had a very hard, unhappy death. And that kind of mixed in with it, and it just made everything so much worse, and I just was a mess.
So, Sean, what was your turning point? How did you pull yourself out of that?
Well, it came down to this. I got so bad that I either said to myself, look, you either commit suicide or you figure out some other positive way of living. So I'm going to just take this concept of committing suicide and I'm going to put it on a shelf because I can always come back to that later. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to just see if it turns out that all the philosophy and all my professors were wrong and everything I thought about life was wrong. And I'm going to begin a quest. And I'm going to start that quest by doing everything the opposite of what I had been doing before. So where I'd been reading depressing books, I started just looking for any spiritual book I could find. And I started reading anything in the scientific literature that seemed to be more of a hopeful kind of scientific approach rather than a dreary one. And then if people started suggesting practices to me, I would just do them. So if someone said, hey, you should try yoga, I started trying yoga. If someone said you should meditate, I started meditating. I would do anything and everything, body work, acupuncture, very physical things. I tried therapy, and then I tried spiritual practices. And then I combined that with lots of reading and lots of studying. And slowly but surely, I started to work my way out of the deep depression and anxiety.
Sean, I think that's a great place for us to take a break, because when we come back, I want to talk to you about what program was the result of this quest and how you were able to succeed at pulling yourself out of that depression. So we're going to take a break for this week's Good Life Tips. Stay with us for information to help you make the positive life changes that we talk about on the show. When we return, I will continue my discussion with Sean Meshorer. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life. I'm Joan Herman. Our guest today is Sean Meshorer, author of the book, The Bliss Experiment, 28 Days to Personal Transformation. Sean, before break, you were describing a depressive state that you had basically been thrust into, and you were talking about the quest that you were on for healing. And what I want to focus on now is, what did you learn during that quest? What program did you develop? And what steps can our listeners take now to achieve that state of bliss?
So coming out of it is I started doing everything, as I mentioned before, but it turns out that not every single thing that people suggest out there actually works. Some things were more helpful than others. Other things actually took me backwards or really didn't help at all, might have made it worse. And so what became clear over time and over the years went along, is that there are a certain number of practices that really work really well. They're universal. I started teaching them to other people. They started having these experiences. I did a lot of research with over 500 mainstream scientific studies and found a lot of supporting evidence from double-blind, placebo-controlled studies that showed that they worked. And so what the Bliss Experiment program became is 28 steps that we can take to being perfectly internally happy, and it's everything that works and nothing that doesn't work. And so it's a real tight, concise program that can show results in a very short amount of time.
And what's interesting about what you're saying right now is that I think a lot of us think that bliss is a feeling. It's something that just happens to us, but you're really saying that it's more of a skill that we can learn?
Yes, I'm saying it's both. We have inside of us, every human being, I don't care what your religion, your background, your age, your gender, we all have what you could say is a reservoir or a capacity for bliss inside ourselves, but most of us, we don't know how to tap into it. And so the program is the skills that we need to uncover, realize it's there. It's almost like an owner's manual for our humanity, for our consciousness. And so it's the practical things we can do to discover what you could say is almost this mystical capability inside of us.
Sean, in your book, you write about the happiness scale and the stages. What is this scale, and where do you think we spend most of our time?
The happiness scale is a way to distill kind of all these different conceptions and misconceptions we have about what makes us happy. So on one end of the scale, I have numbness, because often we're in so much pain, like I was when I was around 20, that just being numb is an improvement over the pain that we're in. Feeling nothing is a positive step forward. Then we start getting into, after we get numb, of course we all know that that's not good enough, and we start seeking things like pleasure, sensory pleasures, the things that we mediate through our sight and touch and taste and hearing. And we can become very immersed in the world of sensory pleasures. But what I'm saying is that that's not enough, because all sensory pleasures are really externally based stimulus. And so we have to move beyond just a pleasure-based approach to happiness. And then there are higher orders of happiness, sort of what I call everyday forms of happiness, which can be warm, loving relationships or serving humanity, as we've said. But even those, as good and positive as they are, aren't the highest end of the happiness scale. The highest end of it is bliss, which is a purely internal state of consciousness where it no longer matters what's going on outside of us. All of our external circumstances could be very bad. So what we find when we look at ourselves in terms of the happiness scale is most of us are spending the bulk of our time doing numbing activities, which can be drugs in a bad way or just lots of TV and movies, or we're doing pleasure-based activities that could be sex or dining out or, 600 thread count sheets and spa treatments. Or, and then a lot of us do understand, especially I'm sure the listeners of your show, Joan, that, cultivating warm, loving relationships and service to humanity are very important things to do. But even when we're doing these things, most people are still spending the bulk of their time in those first three things, and they're not directly trying to cultivate or tap into their bliss capacities. And so if we don't have to give up everything on the lower end of the scale. We can still watch TV. We can still have sex or have a nice meal out. We can still cultivate positive friendships. but we have to have at least some percentage of our time and effort on the direct bliss cultivating end of the scale. And if we can just put a little bit of that into our daily practice, we find that everything shifts and changes very quickly.
Well, Sean, you spoke about your book having 28 steps. Can you share a couple of those tips that people can implement right now to make that shift?
Absolutely. So the quick overview of the program, and there are 28 different practices in it, and you don't have to do all 28 of them. You sort of pick the ones that you gravitate towards. But some of the practices are just based on convincing you that external things aren't all that are cracked up to be. But then some of the higher order ones are we actually practice how to be present in the moment, how to stop and take time to be aware of the moment around us. So there's very centering practical things like just being present, forgetting the past, forgetting the future, how we actually be here now. And then there are other practices like we learn how to counteract the torrent of negative thoughts that we often have, how we have a reflexive capacity in our mind to, say, catastrophize things, and how we can become aware that we're doing that and then change what we're saying to ourselves so that it's more real, less catastrophic, grounded in reality. And then there's really higher order practices such as meditation or japa, which is another really powerful practice that I recommend that help center us into the deepest part of our soul.
Well, and I'm glad that you mentioned about the negative thoughts because I think that that's a real key. You have a quote in your book from Mark Twain, "I know a great many troubles, but most of them never happened." And I think that that is really something that does rob us of our blissful state. We're so anxious about what may or could happen, but never does. So I'm really glad that you touched upon that one. Sean, if you could sum it up in a few sentences before we run out of time, what should we be doing right now, besides a couple of things that you mentioned? What should we take away from this interview and start doing immediately to just start to live a life of joy?
The most important thing to do is to find the things in your life that are going well. It's something that we forget to do, and it's a really fast way to start turning around those kinds of negative thoughts. So just learning how to practice gratitude for 10 seconds a day is a great way to start to see results really fast so that you start to gain confidence in the ideas of the program. So practicing gratitude is just thinking of everything that's going right in your life. And it might just be nothing is going right except you have indoor plumbing and a wonderful cup of coffee in front of you. And that's enough. If you can remember that while you're thinking of everything else that you don't have or you wish you had or isn't going right, you'll start to notice a balance come into your life. And once you can do that for just a few seconds a day, you'll start to realize that there really is something to all the different exercises and practices, and then you'll start to want to explore them as well.
The book is The Bliss Experiment, 28 Days to Personal Transformation by Sean Meshorer. Sean, if our listeners would like to get more information about you and your work, where can they go?
The easiest place is the website, theblissexperiment.com. It's got information about me, the book, my speaking schedule. I blog there on the latest current events and pop culture, and where you can buy the book, which is in hardcover and ebook editions everywhere.
And as always, our listeners can visit our website, cyacyl.com. That stands for Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life. While on our site, listen to past shows as podcasts, read the digital magazine, sign up for our mailing list, take part in the book club, and be sure to follow the show on Facebook and Twitter. Sean, thank you so much for spending time with us today. As I said in the beginning, I think that this is a very important topic. People are really hurting today. And as you said, it's because we have so much emphasis on those things that are material, on those things that are fleeting, that don't last. And I think that your work is very important and you have a wonderful message. And I hope that people start to implement some of the tips that you shared with us. And if nothing else, start to incorporate a sense of gratitude in everything in their life. So thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Joan.
This is Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life. I'm Joan Herman. Thanks for tuning in.